Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not here today. I had to go to a meeting in Chattanooga, and I was going to tell you yesterday, but in all honesty, I was afraid that if I told you, you guys would start crying, y'all would get all upset, and I didn't know if I could handle that. So I decided just to let it be a surprise to you that I wasn't here. Anyways, so second and third period, you guys took the test yesterday. Um, Fourth and fifth, you guys learned how to solve quadratics by completing the square. Tomorrow, I will go over for second and third. I'll go over this homework assignment I'm giving you tonight over quadratic formula, and then on Friday for fourth and fifth period, I'm going to go over both the homework that you guys did last night. So hold on to it, don't let it go, and then of course also the quadratic formula. So let me go ahead and just kind of jump right in about the quadratic formula. So we talked about ways to solve quadratic equations. We talked about solve by factoring. We talked about solving by taking square roots. With fourth and fifth period, I talked about solving by completing the square. So the quadratic formula. So quadratic formula is the catch-all. Like it's the one that you can use no matter what. You see, some of these quadratics, you cannot factor it. Some of these quadratics, you cannot take the square root. And then, like I talked yesterday, some of these quadratics, if they don't fit those two stipulations, it's not worth completing the square. Quadratic formula is the catch-all. You can solve every quadratic by using the quadratic formula, okay? Now, with that being said, why is that not the only method that's taught then? Well, because look at it. I mean, the quadratic formula is kind of confusing in and of itself, right? Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. And then please make sure you understand and see this. It's all over 2a. 2a has to be divided by, as you can see here, because it's separated by plus and minus, both terms have to be divided by 2a. So this is a formula that you need to familiarize yourself with um, because it is the method that you can always use, no matter what, to solve a quadratic. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, you could get on YouTube and you could look up and find songs and rap songs and all kinds of cool stuff that where people have tried to create a way for you to memorize it. Obviously, you don't have to look if you don't want, but try to memorize this. Okay, x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is divided by 2a. So as you can see, when you look at this formula, the thing that you have to know and remember is what is a, b, and c. And we've talked about that extensively, right? When we talk about a, b, and c, we are talking about that equation being in standard form, right? Look, a x squared plus bx plus c. We've talked about that formula enough. You should remember that a is x squared's coefficient, b is x's coefficient, and c is your constant. So as you guys can see here, before I do this quadratic formula, I have to make sure it's in standard form. Meaning, I've got to make sure that all of these are on one side together and that set equal to 0. Once I do that, I can identify what a, b, and c are. Listen, you don't need the variables. You just need the numbers for a, b, and c. And then we're going to simply plug it into the formula and simplify. That's it. So it sounds easy. It just got, it's got tricky stuff to it, because you've got to go through the process of simplifying, and that's kind of hard. So let me show you this. I'm going to leave the formula here for this one, but, past this point, you're going to have to just look at the formula at the top of your sheet. It won't be on here. So is this equation written in standard form ready to roll? Well, absolutely. So let's identify, and you don't always have to write these down, but I want to identify what a, b, and c are. So what is a? Well, a is x squared's coefficient. Well, you see x squared right here. The number in front of it is a 1. So a is 1. Okay, not x squared. It's just 1, the number. B, of course, is your x coefficient, so that's positive 2. And then C is your constant, and remember the sign represents it, so that's negative 63. So there's my A, B, and C value. So here we go. We're going to plug it into our equation. Ready? X equals negative B, that's a 2, plus or minus the square root of B, that's 2, squared, minus 4 times A, 1, times C, negative 63, and all of that is divided by 2 times A, 1. See, I'm just plugging it in. And then I'm just going to go through the process of simplifying. So please pay attention to the process that I want you guys to utilize. 1, leave the negative 2 alone for the time being. And I also, and listen to this, I want you to leave the square root alone. I want you to go to your calculator and I want you to simply type in what is directly underneath the square root. Don't put the square root button in there, please. Sometimes it will be a value that is able to escape from that radical. Sometimes it is not. So let's just get in the habit of leaving the square root off the calculator and let's just go and simplify the value that's underneath it. So if I do that, if I type in 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 63, you should have gotten 256. Now, all of that is over 2 times A, which is 2 times 1, which is 2. So we're getting closer to the answer. But what I want you to do at this time, okay, and I want you to get in this habit, okay, type everything into the formula, then simplify what's underneath the radical, then let's simplify this radical, okay? And we've been doing that recently. Sometimes the entire thing is a perfect square and it gets to escape. Sometimes it's not, so we've got to break it down. Sometimes the value underneath it's negative, so we got to pull out an I. There's various things that could occur here, but let's just focus on breaking down the square root of 256. So check it in your calculator. Check it and see, is it a perfect square? The square root of second x squared 256. Well, absolutely it is. The square root of 256 is 16. So the whole thing gets to come out of that radical. So what we have here is we have negative 2 plus or minus 16 over 2. So my last question is this. Do you notice how all of those, like all of that, they're all whole numbers. There's no radicals. There's nothing that's imaginary. All of it is just numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this thing out by answering what these are, okay? So I'm going to use the highlighter, and then I'll erase it because I want you to make sure you understand how I'm coming up with these answers. I'm going to do negative 2 minus 16. I always like to start with the minus because that will give me the smaller value. But negative 2 minus 16 is negative 18. And then I'm going to take negative 18 and divide it by 2. Negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. One of my two solutions is negative 9. Now let me erase the highlighting here. And this time I'm going to do negative 2 plus 16. Negative 2 plus 16 is positive 14. And then I'm going to divide 14 by 2 and I'm going to get 7. So my two solutions here for this particular quadratic is negative 9 and positive 7. And that's how we do the quadratic formula. Okay? Now listen, because those answers are so nice, that's proof to me that I actually could have factored this problem. And I know factoring is faster and it's easier probably for most of you guys, but I'm trying to show you the method, quadratic formula, and how it works for every single quadratic. There's no quadratic equation that it won't solve. Okay? So there you have it. All right? Now I'm just going to kind of go and pick and choose some values. So let's just go directly below here to number 3. Number 3. Now remember, it has to be in standard form, meaning I need everything on one side. And the beautiful thing about the quadratic formula is I don't have to worry about that first term being positive or negative. I can just move everything to the left side. So I'm going to subtract that 1. And now everything is to the left side. And then I want to identify my A and B and C values. So what is my x squared coefficient? Well, you notice how it's a negative? That means my A value, my x squared coefficient is negative 1. How about B? What is my x coefficient? Well, it's positive 2. And then what's my constant here? It's negative 1. So there are my A, B, and C values. So I can kind of ignore the problem. And now I can focus on my equation. X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. And all of this is divided by 2 times A. So remember what I asked you to do first? I asked you to ignore the radical. And let's just type in what's underneath it. So ignore the radical and type in only 2 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 1. And you get a weird number. You get 0. You get 0. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, on the bottom, what is 2 times negative 1? Well, that's negative 2. So now I said, okay, now let's work on that radical. Well, that's 0. What is the square root of 0? Well, the square root of 0 is 0. So technically what I have here is I have negative 2 plus or minus 0 divided by negative 2. So what are my solutions? All right, well, let's figure it out. I always like to start with the negative. So what's negative 2 minus 0, negative 2, divided by negative 2? Well, negative 2 divided by negative 2 is positive 1. Well, if I add 0, does that change anything? Negative 2 plus 0 is still negative 2. But then I divide it by negative 2, still get positive 1. Well, hopefully you will remember the answer to this question. How come this quadratic only has one answer? Well, remember, it technically has 2. Remember, this is one of those where if I were to graph this thing is going to, it'll be up and down because if you notice your A value is negative. But it's going to come up here and it's going to touch the x-axis at positive 1. And then it's going to turn right back down. So it's one of those situations where, yes, it looks like it has only one solution, but technically it has one solution with what we call a multiplicity of 2. Meaning, it's your answer, yes, but it's your answer twice, technically. So that is why that sometimes occurs, because the radical is the square root of 0, okay? All right, so let's keep jumping around a little bit. Let's look at number 5. We'll just go right down the left side. There's something unique about this particular problem that I want you to see. First, let's get everything on one side. So I'm going to subtract 24. Negative 1 minus 24 is negative 25. So what's unique about this problem? Well, what's my A value, guys? My A value is 9, right? My x squared coefficient is 9. What's my B value? What is my x coefficient? Well, I don't have one, right? There is no x. So if there is no x, then B is 0. And then finally, what's my constant? What's my C value? Well, that's negative 25. So there's the values that I'm plugging directly into my equation. Ready? Negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, and all of this is divided by 2 times A, 9. Okay? Hopefully you guys see that. It's pretty easy, really. Now, again, I know that I said that I want you to focus really on the radical first, but what is negative 0, right? It's just 0. So what I really have here is I have plus or minus the square root of, and then remember, we're going to simplify the value that's underneath the radical only. So I'm going to type in my calculator only 0 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 25. Well, when you do that, that equals 900. 900, okay? And all of this is divided by 2 times A. 2 times 9, 18. Okay, so go check in your calculator. Is 900 a perfect square? If I took the square root of 900, what do I get? Well, I get plus or minus 30 over 18. Well, guys, what is 30 over 18 reduced to? Use alpha y equals number 1. Plug that 30 over 18 in here, and you'll see your answer is plus or minus 5 over 3. There's my two answers, positive 5/3 and negative 5/3. Okay, those are my two solutions using the quadratic formula. Okay, flip over to the back, please. Let's look at a couple more. Again, I could pretty much pinpoint any of these, and they all pretty much work the same way. So let's go over here to number 8. And again, randomly picking. Okay, there's really no rhyme or reason to what I'm going with. But first of all, remember, we need to get everything on one side. Well, if I move this 8x over, does it have anything to combine with? No, it doesn't. So I'm going to put it in the middle because that's my bx term. But then I'm going to add 1. And what am I adding 1 to? The 17, right? So here's what I'm left with. Negative 2x squared minus 8x. And then 17 plus 1 is 18. So let's answer and figure out what's my a, b, and c value. So what's a? What is my x squared coefficient out there? Negative 2. What's b? What is my x coefficient out there? Negative 8. And then what's my constant? Well, it's positive 18. So here we go. We're ready to use our quadratic formula to solve this equation. X equals negative b. Well, notice how b is negative 8. So that's literally negative 8. We'll worry about that in a minute. Plus or minus the square root of. Now, here's the first one we've experienced like this. The next thing says b squared. Well, guys, here's the thing. What is b? B is negative 8. So negative 8 needs to be in parentheses, so I square it. Because remember, if I don't put it in parentheses, if I just went to my calculator and typed in negative 8 squared, it's going to ignore the negative. It's going to do the 8 squared first and then attach the negative. But b is being squared. Well, if b is negative 8 and it's being squared, that means negative 8 is being multiplied by negative 8. And negative times negative is positive. So please get in a habit of when I'm squaring a value that is negative, I put it in parentheses. Okay? I put it in parentheses. Now, so that's b squared minus 4 times a times c, and all of this is divided by 2 times a, negative 2. So let's clean some junk up. What is negative 8? Positive 8. Plus or minus, we're going to ignore the square root, and I'm going to go to my calculator, and just like I said, I'm going to type in my calculator, open parenthesis, negative 8, close parenthesis squared, minus 4 times negative 2 times 18. And if you do that, you get the number 208. You get 208. And all of that is divided by 2 times negative 2, which is negative 4. Okay? Now, ignore everything right now, and let's just focus on the square root of 208. Now, I know 208 is not a perfect square. I know it. Okay? You can type it in your calculator if you'd like, but I know that it is not. So what I want you guys to do is divide it by 2. That's 104. Now, as fast as you could type it into your calculator, let's start at 104 and go down through our list of perfect squares. Okay, ready? Go 208 divided by 100. Definitely doesn't work. Go 208 divided by 81. Nope. 208 divided by 64. Nope. 208 divided by 49. Nope. 208 divided by 36. Nope. 208 divided by 25. Nope. 208 divided by 16. There it is, 13. 16 is the biggest perfect square, and it goes in there 13 times. So how does 16 get to come out of there? It gets to come out as a whole number 4. So here's what we have right this second. Ready? We've got 8 plus or minus 4 square root of 13 over negative 4. Now I want you guys to notice something. Isn't this a real number and this is a real number? It's just attached to a radical. Well, because of that, are they both divisible by -4? Absolutely. So when that happens, I like to clean this up. Remember, both of these two terms have to be divisible by that bottom, or it's just not worth me simplifying it. Well, they both are. Okay, so what is 8 divided by -4? Well, that's -2. Now, here's the thing that's tricky. Let me erase this so hopefully you can understand it. Guys, what is positive divided by negative? Well, it's negative, right? Negative. Well, what's negative divided by negative? Well, that's positive. So if positive and negative are divided by negative, won't that just make it plus or minus again? So plus or minus divided by negative just kind of swallows it up, and it makes it still plus and minus because the plus turns negative and the negative turns plus. So then I can just focus on, well, what's 4 divided by 4? Well, that's 1 times the square root of 13. And you can put the 1 there if you'd like, but it's just not necessary because if there's no number there, it's understood to be 1. So all of this here simplifies to -2 plus or minus the square root of 13. I hope that makes sense to you. That one's kind of tricky, but I think you guys can do it. I think you understand it. So let's move along. I want to do 2 more. So let's do number 10 and number 12 directly below it. So first of all, number 10. Let's get everything on one side. -8. Now let's label our A, B, and C. A is my x squared coefficient, that's -1. B is my x coefficient, it's +10. And C is my constant, that's -8. So here we go, ready? Let's go plug it into our equation. X equals -b, 10, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's 10 squared. Again, why did I not put it in parentheses here? Well, it's not negative. So I don't have to worry about my calculator making a mistake. It won't do it. So b squared minus 4 times a, -1, times c, -8, and all of this is divided by 2 times a, -1. All right, so let's clean some stuff up. I can't do anything with -10, plus or minus. I'm going to leave the square root alone, and I'm going to type in just the 10 squared minus 4 times -1 times -8, and I get 68. If you didn't do that already, then go faster. I'm just joking. All right, so what is 2 times -1? -2. All right, so here we go. I now want to simplify the square root of 68 because I know 68 is not a perfect square. So here we go. Let's do what we did on the last problem. Divided by 2, that's 34. That's your reference point. Do not try a perfect square above 34. So 25. Will 25 go into 68? 68 divided by 25. No. Next, 16. Will 68 divide by 16 evenly? No. Next is 9. Will 68 divide by 9 evenly? No. 68 divided by 4 evenly. There it is. 4 goes into 68 17 times. So what happens to 4, guys? It gets to escape because it's a perfect square. It gets to escape as a 2. And the 17 gets caught, trapped inside. So here's what we're left with. -10 plus or minus 2 square root of 17 divided by -2. So here's my question. Are both of these divisible by that denominator too? Absolutely. So let's do it. Ready? Here's our final answer. Whoops. What is -10 divided by -2? +5. Right? We had to do that first term and divide it by the denominator. Then, remember what we just said? What will happen with this plus or minus with that minus? Remember how I explained it? It swallows it up. The positive becomes negative, the negative becomes positive, so it swallows it up, essentially. And then lastly, what about 2 divided by 2 here? Because we already took care of the negative. 2 divided by 2 is 1 times the square root of 17. So My answer is 5 plus or minus the square root of 17. That is how you solve by using the quadratic formula. Okay? Last one. We're at 25 minutes on the video. So let's finish this up so you have a little bit of time to work in class. 1. Let's get everything on one side. Let's subtract 4x. Let's subtract 5. And of course, it gets to subtract from 9 because they're like terms. So we've gotten everything on one side now. And here's what it looks like. 5x squared minus 4x. And then what is positive 9 minus 5? Well, that's positive 4. Okay? So there it is. I probably should have spread that out a little bit more, but anyhow. Let's name our A, B, and C values. Ready? What is my x squared coefficient? 5. What is my x coefficient? Well, look, it's negative 4. And then what's my constant? Well, it's positive 4. So there's my A, B, and C. Ready? Here we go. X equals negative B, that's negative negative 4. We'll worry about that in a minute. Plus or minus the square root of B being negative 4. I put it in parentheses squared. Minus 4 times A times C. And all of this is divided by 2 times A, which is 5. So let's do some cleanup. Negative negative 4, we said, cancels and becomes positive 4. Then we're going to simplify what's underneath the radical. Well, negative 4 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 5 times 4 actually becomes negative 64. And then on the bottom, 2 times 5 becomes a 10. All right, so let's clean up this negative 64 that's under the radical. Well, hopefully you don't have to think too hard about it, because how does the negative come out of there? As an I. And isn't 64 a perfect square? Absolutely, it's 8. So that becomes 4 plus or minus 8i divided by 10. Now, listen to this question I'm asking, just like I asked on the last one. Is 4 and 8 both divisible by 10? Not really, but kind of. Let me explain. I can't divide it like I did the one above it, where negative 10 gets divided by negative 2 and it's a positive 5. I can't divide it like I took the 2 and divided it by 2 and got 1. But I can, because they're all even, I can let them all simplify each other. What do I mean? Well, doesn't 2 go into every one of those? Of course they do. So I can simplify it, meaning if I divide the whole thing by 2, how many times 2 go into a 4? Twice. Plus or minus. How many times 2 go into 8? 4i. Over, how many times does 2 go into 10? 5. So this can all simplify from 4 plus or minus 8i over 10 down to 2 plus or minus 4i over 5. Now, what I see a lot of times in a case like this is people separate it. And they do 2 over 5 plus or minus 4 over 5i. And by all means, if you want to do that, feel free. Okay? It will never get it wrong unless you just make a mistake when you do it. But either of these two answers is 100% simplified, 100% correct. Now, with that being said, what about this one? Is that 100% simplified, 100% correct? Well, it's not 100% simplified. So it's hard to say it's 100% correct. But would I mark it wrong? No way. Okay? Because that means you did all of this good work. You did it all correctly. And that's what matters to me. So, there you have it. So technically, all 3 of those highlighted answers would be acceptable to me. Okay? Because it means you did the work right. So, here's the deal. If you turn over on the back side, you got about 15 minutes left in class. Okay? So don't complain. I'm going to give you 8 problems because you need some practice with quadratic formula. So please do it yourself. Don't cheat. Okay? Cheaters never win. So 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the front. I'm sorry. 2, 3, 4, 5 on the front. And then on the back, I want you to do 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay? So that's 8 problems. 4 on the front, 4 on the back. Now, the light at the end of the tunnel is this. Tomorrow, we'll go over this. It's a short class because of, the fact that it is our homecoming day. So I will not obviously give you any homework over the weekend. So I hope that you guys understood this. It's not too hard. If we have to spend some more time on it at the beginning of next week, it won't be an issue. We can do that. So hopefully you get it. We'll go over it tomorrow. Hope you have a great Thursday. See you soon.